Welcome to our next lecture on Kuzari. Today, I may violate one of my own rules. I know that's a terrible thing to do, but my rule of not skipping anything. But instead of openly violating that rule, I think what I'm going to do is kind of run through a few things. You'll understand why, and I don't think anyone's going to be mad at me. If you are, please say so, and I could slow down. But just for uh, a purpose, we are up to in the Korobkin version, this version here, we are up to page 243, which is the second essay, or Mamar Sheni, paragraph 79, or Ayin Tes. So, in this, the Chazar King is about to ask the Kuzari a question. And the Kuzari just kind of, they've been discussing the language, the Hebrew language, and the significance of the Hebrew language. And the Chaver, the rabbi, has been answering the special significance and special holiness of the Hebrew language, and that it's built into the structure of the language, that it's a unique language with which to grow in spirituality and connect with God, etc. That it was designed for that purpose and not for other purposes that other languages might be better at, but Hebrew is the best for that reason. So then the Kuzari asks a behavioral question, which is interesting in Ayin Tes. I'm going to just stick with the Korobkin version, and I'm just going to read the Hebrew from there, which is the Ibn Tibbon translation. Amar HaKuzari. I know I switch around a lot with which Hebrew I'm reading. I'm just kind of discovering what works best. So that's what I'm doing today. So Esh'al otcha, let me ask you a question. Hateda lama misno'aim haYehudim b'kriyat ivrit. Why do the Jewish people shake or rock? And you may notice, even as I give this lecture, I'm kind of gently rocking, and now I'm a little self-conscious about it, but I just do it naturally. Anyone that grew up in an Orthodox setting and studied in a yeshiva of almost any sort, you get into the habit when you're learning. You rock back and forth, just like I'm doing right now. So why did Jews rock back and forth when they read Hebrew? They don't seem to rock back and forth when they're reading science books or when they're having a discussion about secular subjects. But whenever they're reading holy books in Hebrew, they're always shuckling. That's what in Yiddish it's called to shuckle, which just means to rock back and forth. So I'm going to read his answer, the first paragraph or two, and then the rest of it, he goes into Hebrew diktok, Hebrew grammar, to show like special things about the structure of Hebrew grammar. And I'm going to just pick a couple little highlights so you get a sense for what he's saying and run through or maybe even skip parts of it. So Amar Chaver, I just turned the page to 244. So the Chaver, the rabbi, answers as follows. Amru, it is said that the reason why we do this is ba'avor he'ir hachoma tivi, to arouse your inner energy. Now, it's interesting because this is the answer that seems to have kind of made it through history. Nowadays, you might hear people say, quote, in medieval times, a lot of the rabbis would say that we do it because the pasuk says, B'chol atzmosai tomarno, with all of my bones, with all of my body, I speak your praises, right? So when you say something holy, you get your entire body involved in it, and that's why we shuckle. But the Kuzari doesn't like the Rabbi Levi doesn't really like this one. V'ineni savar shehu elamitzad ha'inyan she'anachnu bo. But rather, I think that the reason why we shuckle, the reason why we rock, is because of the specific subject that we're discussing now, the subject being the special nature of the Hebrew language. And so he's going to give a much more sociological explanation for why we rock back and forth, as opposed to a spiritual one like the one he just gave, that people say. And he says, because Hebrew, the way it's written, Hebrew, especially if you compare it to English, right? It follows very, very clear and basic rules. I mean, there's always a few little exceptions here and there, but for the most part, if you learn the vowels and you learn the sounds of the letters, you can read it, right? You can chant the Hebrew. It's a very easy language to learn how to read it, basically, right? So, and he says that so sometimes you can have 10 people or even more gathering around a book. Now, I can't help but mention a story that's told, whether it's true or not, whether it's not true, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of funny, but also has a lesson in it. The story is told of when the Yemenite Jews made Aliyah on masse, like in large groups of them. I think it was in the early 1950s or something. Large groups of Yemenite Jews were brought to Israel by plane, and someone might remember the name of the operation. Maybe, I think, Wings of Eagles or something like that. Anyway, bottom line, I might have that wrong, but regardless, the Yemenite Jews were brought to Israel, and it is told the story that there was an old Yemenite Jew who would get the newspaper in the morning, and when he was sitting on the bus on his way to work, he always held the newspaper upside down, right? And people on the bus were the people that were traveling every day, they didn't want to say anything to him. They figured he must just not really know how to read, and he was trying to pretend to be like everyone else who's reading the newspaper. Nobody wanted to confront him as to, why are you reading the newspaper upside down? But, every once in a while, people would come and chuckle or laugh a little, whatever. So finally, somebody had the guts to ask him, and explain, to explain to him, that, you're reading the newspaper upside down, just turn it over. And this is how you're supposed to read it. And he tells this to the guy, and the guy tells him, he says, what do you mean? This is how I read. I'm reading Hebrew. And he was able to read the paper just fine, but he reads it upside down. So he asks the guy, why do you read it upside down? Right? That's kind of weird. So he explains, when I was in Cheder in Yemen, right, when I was a young boy, so we had one book to learn from, and we all sat around, and I sat on the other side of the table. So I learned to read Hebrew upside down, bottom up, left to right. Everyone else learned top down, right to left. I learned the opposite. So I read Hebrew upside down. Now, whether the story is true or not, I have no idea. It doesn't really matter. There's a lot of lessons to learn about assumptions we make about people, and so on. But the Kuzari is really saying this right here, and we actually, there are pictures. I'm pretty sure I remember seeing a photo of Cheder boys learning in Yemen, and they were sitting around the table with one book. They didn't have enough money, resources to have a lot of books. So if you got unlucky, then you learned sideways or upside down, right? Anyway, so he's saying that when we all study together, and this is the key thing that I want you to get out of this, is the idea that because we are all studying the Torah together, and we all study from a big Sefer Torah, it's written very large, right? And because everyone is gathering around, because it's so important for everyone to learn. That's the emphasis that I really want to bring out of this, right? It's so important that everyone gets together to learn. Especially in the days of Yehuda Levi, books where it's a big deal. It's not, you can't just write a Torah, you have one or a few for a community, and that's it. So each person has to, at some point, be able to read the words, right, with his own eyes. He has to be able to see what's being written. And then he has to back off so that the other people can have a chance to read. So everyone's sitting around. One guy leans forward and reads, right? And then he goes back, and the next guy leans forward and reads, and then he goes back, and the next guy leans forward and reads. So everybody together has to have a chance. So people are constantly rocking back and forth to allow others to read. It's really a really beautiful idea here. He's making something, he's saying that this cultural thing, that's really a cultural thing about Jews, some people make fun, some people, it's just a cultural thing, that this is how we read and study when we're studying Torah, right? So because the Sefer is on the ground in front of them. Remember, they weren't sitting around tables most of the time. They're sitting around the floor, and they put out a sheet or a carpet on the floor, and you put the Torah on the carpet, and everyone's looking over and reading, right? This is the first reason. This is the main reason. This is how it all started. It all started so that everyone can get a chance to be close and then give the other guy a chance to get close. So then people see everyone's reading the Torah like this, so they read the Torah like this, and then eventually everybody reads the Torah like this, and everybody rocks back and forth. But that's where it started. That's his theory. I love that. There's no way to know if his theory is right or not. It's as good as any other theory, I imagine. But what's beautiful about it is he's making a Jewish cultural practice, and he's saying that it comes from the respect of others in learning. Respecting everyone having a chance to learn, everyone having a chance to read, and that I think is a really sweet thought. But then he says, Amnam Zulasenu, but other people not like us, everyone reads their own book, right? How many people not among the Jews in those days even read anything, right? So the people that did had their own book, and they sit and they read, right? So they never had to do it, right? So and this is his theory as to why we shackle. So now you've heard the going theory that it's a spiritual idea. We get into it and everything, and by shaking back and forth, so on, we arouse our spirits to God. And the other idea is just a cultural practice that arose from this particular need. And I'm at the top of page 245. Malas hanikud umesoris hashiva malachim. So then he says, and now I'm going to tell you the greatness of the Hebrew dots, the nikud, and the greatness of the 7 kings. The 7 kings are the major vowels. Kametz, patach, chirik, segol, etc. The dots that we're familiar with that help us sound out the words. He's going to go now for many pages describing the greatness. Wait, hold on. I'm going to silence my my air conditioning because it's really loud. So hold on 1 second. I'm pausing the recording. All right, it takes a few seconds for the AC to actually go off, but I hope you can all hear me anyway. I'll bring the mic a little closer. So, and because he's on the subject of describing the structure of the Hebrew language and the way it's built, the way it's written, as being something especially conducive towards worshiping God. And he's going to start bringing examples of how the words are structured. This is going to go on for several pages. And I'm going to skip. Okay. So, you can feel free to read it. I just don't think there's that much for us to gain, from doing this. A few points I do want to make. Number one, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi here in writing this entire thing. So this goes on for several pages all the way until, page, let me see, in the Korobkin version, we're talking about all the way pretty much to the end of the second essay, page 260, all the way to the end of paragraph 80, which we just started, which we're in the middle of now. So I'm going to skip all of that, but I will state just a few points that I think are important. Number one, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is making the assumption, right, that the nikudot, right, those are the dots, are something which are inherent to the holiness of the Hebrew language. Now, I'm not an expert in linguistics, but I can tell you, or the history of Hebrew, but I can tell you that the origin of the nikudot may not be historically, his assumption may not be historically correct. In other words, so he's stepping on a dangerous third rail here, because when you claim that there's a special holiness to the dots, that means you're assuming that these dots are original to the original Lashon Kodesh. I don't know exactly when the dots first showed up, but I'm pretty sure that it was not in the original Hebrew. Like when you look in ancient Semitic writing, and even early when they started using the alphabet that's currently used somewhere in the early Second Temple period, right? That I think the dots were after that. I'm pretty sure that they came to the times of the Bali Masoris, which is like the 4th or 5th century. Now, don't quote me on that. Look it up. But I'm pretty darn sure that's true. But you can look it up. So the similar thing is the assumption of the notes, what we call the trup, or the notes that we use, the cantillation marks that tell us, when to start, when to stop, where to make phrases, where to make sentences that are really important. But I'm pretty sure they have a later origin he's claiming. But nonetheless, his general argument of the ease of use of the Hebrew language, the way it's designed in such a way that makes it conducive for people to learn it, together, to people understand how to read it, and how all these marks and dots aid us in reading together. I think those are very important points, and those are the points that he really makes. So I apologize that I'm skipping, even though I promised I wouldn't. But feel free to read all of that for yourself. So I'm going to read right now. I'm just going to end with paragraph 81, right? And paragraph 81 is the last paragraph in the second essay in Ma'amar Sheni, right? So Amar Kuzari. So the Chazar king has now heard a very lengthy discourse on the structure and nature of the Hebrew language and why it's so special. So he responded as follows. I've heard enough about the language, about the Hebrew language, to endear the language to me. I now see how special it is and how wonderful the structure of the language is, and I've heard enough to know that. But now I'm going to beg you, right? That you describe to me. You describe to me clearly. I want to get down to the bottom line here, right? El to'ar ha'oved Elohim etzlechem. Describe to me what a worshiper of God, a servant of God, looks like, right? What does it mean to be an Oved Elohim? What does it mean to serve God? Ultimately, that is the goal of the Chazar king. He wants to be a servant of God. That's the point of this whole book and this whole conversation. So what does it look like? What does a holy person look like, right? So you're going to see this is going to open up the third essay, and you can imagine that we're going to be listening to a lot of very, very, very beautiful and interesting ideas. So the Achar Kain, and after that, so he's kind of giving us a guide for what to expect in the upcoming book, right? First, I want to know what an Oved Elokim, a worshiper of God, looks like, or a servant of God looks like. And then Avakesh Mimchan, then I'm going to ask you, Badeos uva Amuna Shorashim. I want to know what are the bottom line fundamentals of what are the bottom line opinions, the bottom line, the dogma or the belief system. What do you guys believe in? What's the bottom line of Judaism, right? And that's what I'm going to ask you afterwards. And afterwards, Eshalcha, I'm going to ask you again. I'm very interested. You mentioned the fact that you guys have access to the earlier wisdoms. The wisdoms, remember, this is the assumption that in the old days they had wisdom and knowledge and scientific knowledge that was lost, right? And that the wisdom of the Torah, the wisdom of Shlomo, knew everything, and that a lot of that was lost. I want to know what kind of access you have nowadays to those old wisdoms, like we discussed before. So I know we've delved into this, and we're about to start the third essay, and and we will. But what we're going to find here in Kuzari, and it was what we've already found to some degree, and we're going to continue to find, is really the basis of a lot of what today is believed by most Haredi Jews, right? In other words, when the idea that the ancients knew more wisdom, knew more science than we do, right? That's an idea that the Rambam conclusively disagreed with, right? But the Kuzari is claiming. So that when we have debates today, when you find debates about science and Torah, right? If you ever met someone who told you, how could you say the Gemara was wrong about this fact? The Chachamim, the people, the rabbis of the Talmud, they had access to better wisdom than we have today. And you ever wondered, where did they get this idea from, right? Well, the Kuzari is really the one who laid that idea out. And we're going to see a lot of things like that. Another one I'm going to put out there, another debate that you may find often between Haredi Jews today, more ultra-Orthodox Jews, and others that are more on the rationalist side of things, is the idea that a Torah leader, right, isn't just great in Torah, but is also great as a leader, as a political leader, right? The idea that a person who's great in Torah is also a person who is a great leader. And you could see, I mean, some of you guys have probably had debates about this, or certainly heard debates about this subject. where somebody says, well, listen, the rabbi over there in Bnei Brak, he might be a great Torah scholar, and he might be very wise, and he might be a great guide in serving God. But since when does he know politics, right? Since when should he be involved in politics? If you tell that to someone in many camps in the Orthodox world today, they'll look at, oh, of course, he's a Torah scholar. He knows everything, right? Where do these ideas come from? Well, as I've stated before, the ideas did not originate with the Kuzari, with the book we're reading, but the Kuzari was the one who laid them out in a clear fashion. So I want you to understand the importance of this work for what happened in Jewish thought for many, many generations to our day, why it still resonates to our day. But let's see. So the Chazar king just asked three biggies, right? Number one, what does a servant of God look like? Number two, what are the basic bottom line beliefs, right, of the Jewish people? And number three, what do you guys still retain from the ancient wisdom that the rest of the world lost access to? Before I go on to the third essay and we start hearing the answers, any comments about what we said about the second essay? If not, I'm gonna go on. You have to unmute yourself.
Just a question about trope.
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Trope, yeah. How important is that? I mean, we rely a lot on making sure that that's done with everything we read
Right.
out of the Torah, but it seems like it wasn't an original thing when people read Torah. When it came in, why did it become so important, and why do we persist with it?
Well, it is. It's important because for a lot of reasons. It's tradition for one thing, but also it really does break up the. First of all, it emphasizes things that deserve emphasis. But most importantly, it breaks up phrases, which sometimes affects the meaning and translation of the verse. Right, where you start and stop. And so how you make those sentences are very important. I didn't go into there's books and books and books written about the origin of these things and the history of these things. I'm really not an expert in that, right? But so I'm pretty sure most of it was third, fourth, fifth century by the Bali Masora. But if I'm wrong, please feel free to do the research and let me know. But it's certainly by the time the early codices were written, like the Aleppo Codex or whatever, these were written. The Trupp was being written in, so they're very ancient. Don't get me wrong, very ancient and very important, and they help us read the Torah. They help us understand the Torah. But are they part of the original Hebrew language? That's a whole different question altogether. Okay, so Ma'amar Shalishi. Any other comments before I go on? If not, I'll go on. Okay, so Omar Hechaver. So the rabbi says to him, he now has to answer this big question: what does an Oved Hashem? What does a servant of God look like? Minhag ha'oved etzleinu. Right? How does by us among the Jews? How does a Oved, a servant of God, how does he act? How does he comport himself? What does he do? What does his life look like? So Einenu Nigzar Min Olam. Number one, he's not separate from this world. These are beautiful ideas that are rock solid Jewish ideas, no matter what school of Judaism you claim to be an adherent of. Shelo yeh lemasa olav v'yimas hachayim she'emitovas abore. The life and experiencing life is not something disgusting to him. It's not something that's a burden to him that, I have to live in this world and I have to be involved in worldly things. These are things that God gave us. These are things that God granted us. He gave us this life and enjoying this world and being involved in matters of this world. He's not separate from them, right? V'zocher tovaso alav bahem. And the servant of God remembers whenever he or she experiences things in this world that are pleasurable, that are good, that are special, he thanks God for them, right? And Commotion Emer, like it says, as Mispar Yomecha Amale, God promises us, right, that He is going to give us a good life. If God is promising us that He's going to give us a good life and reward for our good behavior, so then clearly a good life is a good thing, right? God wouldn't say in the Torah, if you do good, I'm going to give you this, this, and this, and this. Well, if those things are bad, if those things are not things that we're not supposed to be involved in, then why would God promise these things to us? Clearly, they're good things. They're things we're supposed to experience. We're supposed to live. We're not supposed to be separate from this world, separate from other people. God, how many times in the Torah does it say you're going to have long days, you'll live long? Why would living long be a reward if living wasn't important, right? If living wasn't a good thing? Rather, he loves this world that he lives in. And he loves to live a long time. Why is it that he loves this world? Because he knows that if you live a good life and you live properly, then you acquire olam haba, the world to come. What exactly that means is not really the subject of today's lecture, but the point being is that by living a good life, we gain something, we get somewhere, right? Right? And the more you do in this world, so being here is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to live well. It's an opportunity to do good deeds, to act properly, right? And thereby earn our place in whatever olam haba means, right? Whatever the world to come means. But we're achieving something, we're getting somewhere. And the more and better we do, the more and better we live this real life, the closer we get to and higher we get in olam haba. Ach hu misaveh zeh, right? However, the only time he ever desires, right, something else, in other words, desires reaching this olam haba, this next life, right, is only in very, very specific circumstances. If he reaches the level of Chanoch, for example, right? Chanoch, it says, Vayisalei Chanoch esalim. Chanoch went up to God, whatever that means in Bereshis and Genesis when it says, right? In other words, he achieved such a high level of spirituality that he had already achieved everything there is to achieve in this world, and he was ready to move on to the next one, right? And he desired the next one, right? Olam Madregas Eliyahu Zachor Latover, Eliyahu, who are the two people we know of from the Torah that it doesn't seem to the Torah and the prophets don't record their death. They just went up to God, right? So he's saying the Chanoch and Eliyahu in a separate category, even from the other greats of Jewish history, Moshe Rabbeinu even, right? Lived a very long life and a life that was very, very involved in this world, right? And then ultimately died. And we know, for anyone who learns the Torah, know that Moshe didn't want to die. He wanted to go into the land of Israel. He wasn't ready from his own perspective, right? So he wanted to be in this world. So sometimes you might have a person who achieves this great level and want to go all the way up, right? Right? And to ascend to the level of even as much as the angels. Right? This person he doesn't want to be lonely because his spirituality is so great that he's lonely in this world. But if he ascends to the level of the angels, he won't be lonely because he'll be in their company. Avolheim tzivto, because they will be his companions. Such a person might be lonely when he's in the presence of many other people. Because this person is already removed from this world, right? And he's already seeing into the next world. He doesn't want to have to eat or drink anymore. And people like this, such people, true asceticism might be a proper thing, right? But they're so rare. Remember that even the great heroes of Jewish history and the great heroes of the Torah didn't reach that level. Just those two individuals, right? Okay. Such people may desire death, right? They've already reached the purpose, right? And if we ever get to the point where we've done everything possible in this life that could possibly be done and achieved, and now all we want is spirituality, maybe we can get there. And then I need to pause for a second. So then he says this level, right, is another category, right? Right? L'chachamim hamispalsifim avo bevedidos. Those philosophers who have reached a level, right, of love in their solitude, right? And this isn't, he doesn't come out super critical against the philosophers here, right? He understands that the philosophers have achieved a significant level of spirituality where they love their solitude. Right? Because when they're alone, they're able to concentrate and focus their thoughts and think of intellectually solid answers to the big questions of life. They're able to use their solitude to discover answers to questions, to answer truthful answers to questions, because they have many doubts, right? Such people, they have reached, it's a similar level where they love solitude. They love being alone because it gives them the peace and the opportunity to really achieve intellectually what they want to achieve. However, they still they still do want some level of interaction with their students, right? Because the students help remind them of things, then ask them questions and challenge them, right? Right, just like a person who's a businessman, right? He's not really a person who's simply focused on trying to make a profit. He really couldn't care less about the people he's dealing with and buying and selling from. But he does need them to be there because he can't make any business if he's the only guy in the world. The only way he's going to make a profit if he does business with others. So philosophers also achieve a level of where they desire solitude, but then again, they can't fully love solitude because they need others to interact with them. You can't become a genius without having students that ask you questions and challenge your conclusions and give you ideas to think in other directions. You need that interaction and so on. So we have two levels of people which are like very big exceptions to the rule. Such individuals, there's no hope. None of us ever desire to achieve this kind of level. This is not something that we're looking for. We're not looking for Chanoch or Eliyahu's level, right? Right? And remember, the entire Torah doesn't idolize that level. The Torah mentions Eliyahu going to God, mentions Chanoch, but 99% of the Torah is not about people like that, right? And the same thing, the philosophers, right? They might seem to like loneliness, but the truth is their interaction with people is necessary. However, right, there's another kind of people. He's kind of getting out of the way those people that choose solitude in order to focus in on what a real Oved Hashem, what a real servant of God looks like. So he's mentioning people that are in different categories. Eliyahu and Chanoch, people that simply are so spiritual that all they want is to be up in the next world. The philosophers who want peace and solitude because it helps them think, right? And then there's we have mentioned in the earlier books of the prophets, it mentions sometimes the Bnei HaNeviim, the sons of the prophets is the literal translation, the people that were seeking prophecy. And they're described more or less as people that got together in small groups away from society and engaged in spiritual practices to bring themselves to levels of prophecy. So in the time when the Shekhinah resided in the Holy Land, when the nation was prepared and on the level where Nevuah and prophecy was something that they were ready for. So then there were some nefradim, some people that would go out and live in the desert, in the wilderness, and they would get together with similar people that had similar goals. Even they were not completely alone. Right? But they would help each other study Torah and maseh and learn how to do and act what the Torah wants from us. Hamekarvim, that would bring them close to that level of holiness, which is, and those are called the Bnei HaNeviim, the sons of the prophets. So those were groups of people that would gather together and engage in holy pursuits. So these are all different kinds of groups that existed. In other words, there's a small place for them within our society. There's a place for people that are just so holy that they're all they're interested in is spirituality. A few in our history. There's also a place for people that want to do scientific research and really need to sit in their office, close the door, or sit in a cave, or sit in a mountaintop, or somewhere alone where they can contemplate the issues and problems that they're working on. But even they also need people. And then there's also a place in our religion in the proper time and context for people to gather together in groups and try together to help each other achieve holiness. However, bisman in our day, in the nation that we live with today, in the places where we live today, and in the times that we live in today, people aren't having visions of God. They're not prophesying today. With the little bit of knowledge, right, that we have, and the wisdom of the natural world having been diminished. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi understands that the previous generations had access to knowledge of science that was better than ours. In other words, his in his day, right? Someone who such case, if today somebody would decide to act in such a way and separate himself from society, such a person is simply bringing upon himself suffering, bringing upon himself mental illness, right, and physical illness, right? Right, and people will look at him as if he's ill and if he's sick and there's something wrong with him. People will think shehu dalus akniya v'ashiflas, right? They'll think that he looks this way because he's humble, because he carries himself lowly, right? V'yashuv ne'asar, right? But in truth, right, what's going to happen is he's going to feel himself like a prisoner. He's going to hate his life. He's going to be depressed. He's going to be sad because he's missing company of other human beings. Right? He's going to think that he's missing human contact. He's missing contact with society, right? He's suffering. And it's not really because he has such a desire for being alone and he has such pleasure by being alone. How could it possibly be any other way? He's not connecting himself with any holy prophets, right? A group. He hasn't reached the level of the philosophers that he can really contemplate all these big philosophical ideas. So that he can find some pleasure from these ideas. The Emor, right? But you might say, right, that at least he's a God-fearing person, he's a pious person. Right? He wants to approach God alone. So I just want to stop for a second and point out that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi here is really focusing in on something that was an image of holiness that was obviously very prevalent in his day, right? Obviously, in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's time, if you asked an average person on the street, tell me what a holy man looks like, they would have told you he's a guy who sits in the monastery, right, alone. He doesn't talk to anybody, and he pores over holy books, and he studies, and he does all kinds of spiritual practices and meditations and chants and whatever it is that he does in order to achieve God and closeness to God, right? And this would have been an answer that you would have heard from other people and other religions. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is saying that's all a bunch of baloney, right? He's really upset. He's sad. It's not natural for a human being to live in such circumstances. And the natural circumstances within which we live are the circumstances within which God wants us to live. That's tov. That's good. It's good for us to live in this world, right? Nowadays, we don't really look at holiness in the same way that they did then. So nowadays, if you ask someone on the street who's holy, you might get a different answer. But in his day, so he's coming to counter that idea, right? So So, but you might think, well, he knows all of these special prayers, he knows all of these special supplications. It might be true that he may get momentary pleasure from a meditation, from a special prayer session or whatever. But the moment they become rote, the moment he does it once or twice or three times, he's not getting any pleasure from them anymore. There's nothing to be had from those few moments, right? So you and I might have a spiritual moment once or twice here and there from sitting down alone and singing something to ourselves or meditating over a concept, but it doesn't last long. It's not something that we can really, it's not a lifestyle. Whatever he says, it's not going to have any effect on his soul. He's not going to find any sense of hachna'ah, of submission before God, and no sense of supplication. His soul is going to desire, right? He's going to desire these things, and it's going to desire these things that the human soul actually needs, right? The things that come mehashema, from listening to others, v'ra'iyah, from seeing others, v'hadibur, and speaking with others, v'ya'iyun, and being ma'ayin, and analyzing things, via asek, and general business, v'achila v'ashtia, and eating and drinking, v'mishkal, and sexual relations, and making a living, v'takonas beso, and fixing up your house, v'ezras dalim, and helping the poor, v'ezer atorah b'mamono, and supporting study of Torah with your money and with your resources. All of these things that are part of life, he's going to miss them. So it's not realistic. No one today, according to Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, should be following such a path. And if you see such a person and you think he's holy, he's really depressed. Is really what he's saying. He's really just depressed. You think he's all, and when you see him depressed, ooh, he's very humble. No, he's not humble. He's depressed. He has choli hanefesh, which is really mental illness. Kishiyira shum kilkol. When such a person sees, right, that it's a mess, right? He sees that there's a problem. He's been living a life of nothing, right? He hasn't achieved anything. Has he done any special chesed? Has he helped the poor? No. Has he involved in business? No. Has he had a relationship with a partner, a sexual relationship with a partner that was rewarding to both of them? No. Has he eaten or drank anything that was enjoyable? No. Has he had Eon? Has he had the chance to really delve into a subject without having anyone to teach him and anyone to discuss with and question his judgments? No. Nothing. He's all on his own, right? He hasn't done anything that a human being should be doing, right? He's going to end up simply regretting. He's going to regret everything he put his soul to do. And his regret is going to add and get worse and worse. It's going to gather him. He started this thinking he's going to do something special, something holy, something spiritual. And he did all this work to try to be alone. In the meantime, he accomplished absolutely nothing. So Amar Kuzari. So if that's the case, you just told me what holiness does not look like. Okay. So what does holiness look like? Right? So what then today would be a chassid? What would a pious person look like? Right? And this is fascinating. His answer, the rabbi's answer, is fascinating. Amar HaChaver. Now, if without looking ahead, but if you already looked ahead, it's too late. What do you think, right? The one sentence answer, what does a holy person look like, right? How do you think the answer would start? Any ideas?
Probably a humble person who does good deeds.
Okay. All right. That's a good thing. I would kind of say something similar along those lines. Leslie, any thoughts about how the quick answer, what a holy person looks like in Judaism?
I would go with Jack's answer.
Okay. Yes. So, and that's probably, I would say something along those lines as well. But what he starts off, it's going to be what we just said is going to be part of his answer. But the first thing is kind of astonishing a little, but beautiful, but wonderful. Hechassid hu A person who is pious is hanizhar b'medina, so a person who is careful about the people of his country, right? He's a leader of his country, and he wants to be a leader and take care of it. Misha'eru mechalek l'chol anoshel tarpam v'chol sipkam. He is willing to set in place, right? Such a leader that he sets in place policies that he can help all of the people to make sure that the economy is good, so everyone has what they need, and so on, right? V'yenag b'hem kitzedek, and he rules people with righteousness. So right away we're starting to see, what did Rabbi Yehuda Halevi think when he thought of a chassid, a pious person? He thought of a pious person as a leader, and literally a political leader, but a political leader who puts into place policies that are fair and just and kind and lead to a successful and healthy economy for the public. Lo yoge echad mehem, he doesn't press anyone. Lo yitein lo yoser michalko aroi lo, and he doesn't give special favors to anyone, right? V'yim tzoeim be'es tzarcho aleim shomim lo, right? And when people need him, right, when he finds people that need him, he listens to their needs and he pays attention to others. Mimaharim la'anoso be'es kra'o, and he runs to answer when they have a call, when he has the ancient equivalent of a FEMA that runs when there's a disaster, right? Yitzavim b'yasukim mitzvaso, and because he has in this position, he can tell people what to do, and they will listen to him. V'yazirem b'zoheru, and he will warn them against doing bad things, and they will be careful and listen to him. So this was not what I expected, right? This is not what we expected, right? It wasn't what I expected when I first learned this book, right? But it's remarkable because the truth is that it obviously Rabbi Yehuda Halevi knows that every chassid isn't necessarily, the governor of a state or the president of a country, right? Or the king or whatever they had then, right? So he obviously realizes and knows, right, that these properties of chassid are things that we all should aspire to, right?
Well, do you think he's just directly talking to the king?
To the king. Well, yeah, that's definitely part of it.
That to me seems like part of it. He's saying, yeah, so this is one of the things that a holy person does. If you're a leader, this is what you do. Not necessarily everybody that's holy is a leader, but
right. Okay. So he's talking to a king. No,
he's talking to the king, I think. But the point is, he's trying to say also that you probably, as a holy person, ought to be a leader of your group or congregation or group of people you associate with, and do proper things.
Yeah, and so I think you're definitely right. He is talking to a king, and what he's really saying is, you don't have to be anything materially different from who you are to be a chassid, to be a pious person. You can be the king. You can write your decrees, and you can have your courts, and you can do whatever it is that kings do as their function as the government, right? You can continue doing those things, but do it right, and then you'll be pious, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to go to a monastery. You don't have to go to the mountaintop. You don't have to, give up all of your worldly goods and sleep on a bed of nails, right? You can be who you are and be a chassid, right? And be pious. And that's true if you're talking to a king, which you're right, he is here, or you're talking to any average person, right? You're whatever you do, you're a psychologist, you're a doctor, you're a plumber, you're a businessman, whatever it is that you do it and do it right, So Amar Kuzari, so the Chazar king, of course, reacts the way we sort of reacted. I'm not asking you about who's a good leader. I'm asking you who's a chassid, who's pious, right? So Amar Chaver, so the Chaver said, no, chassid hu mishahu moshel. A pious person is a leader. That's what a pious person is. A pious person is a leader, right? Nishma b'chushav v'kochosav hanafshim v'hagufiyim, right? And it can be seen in all of his senses and all of his skills, both his spiritual skills as a human, as psychological, social skills, and his physical skills, right? Umanhigam hanoga hagufis, right? And a pious person leads people like a leader does, right? Someone who is a ruler over his own spirit is greater than a person who conquers the city. So here's where we're getting a hint that that Rabbi Yehuda Levi isn't just thinking that he doesn't really mean that to be a chassid you have to be a king, right, or whatever the leader title is, right? Because he's bringing as a source, right, a moshel berucho, someone who rules over his own spirit, is more important. So being the big king, if you are a king, you can be a chassid by acting the way I described, right? And if you're not a king, you be a moshel berucho, be a ruler over your own spirit. You're still a leader, right? Such a person is the person who's truly prepared for actual leadership. Because if we took this person who is a chassid, right, who is pious, and we made him the king, right, he would run it with righteousness, the same way he ruled over himself. This is incredible wisdom. I mean, it's we know this intuitively, but you don't make a person your leader if you're not first able to show that you're the person who can rule over yourself, right? If you can rule over your own soul and you can rule over your own body, then we can start talking about making you president, right? But if you can't control yourself, then you don't belong in the business of being a leader. So being a chassid requires being a ruler over yourself. Then when we put you in the position of authority over others, we know that you're going to be able to rule justly, kindly, properly, and so on. It is remarkable that, he emphasized a lot about economic wisdom, right? In other words, making sure that the economy runs so that everyone has what they need. It's a very kind of a modern sounding idea, but it should be obvious. But anyway, so what such a person does, what is it? So now he continues with his description of a chassid, of a pious person. V'chosam hakochos hamitzavim, he is able to control his own physical desires, right? Umana osam min hariboy, and he stays away from increasing and filling his own physical desires and engaging and indulging in them more than necessary. Right? He does them appropriately. It doesn't mean he doesn't eat, right? So now he's describing a chassid in a way that doesn't really require the leadership aspect. It's just something that we all need to know. A pious person enjoys this world. He doesn't sit on the mountaintop, right? But he only does what's necessary. He enjoys a good meal, but he doesn't eat 3 pieces of steak, right, at one meal, and a giant heap of whatever, and then a whole cake for dessert, right? He does it appropriately, the way he should. Right? And it's enough that he engages to the extent that it fulfills his needs that have to be filled, right? When it comes to eating properly, the proper amount, drinking the proper amount, according to the appropriate, proper way, and washing, making sure he's clean is good. But sitting all day in a hot tub and going to the steam bath, whatever, all day for pleasure is more indulgent than necessary. But he does make sure he bathes, right? And he also controls those tendencies towards anger, right? And the desire to always win, right? The desire to always win, Hamoel, right? He does what's appropriate, winning the appropriate battles that are appropriate. Right? That the things that help, right? In a productive way, defeating people in arguments when you're discussing topics and subjects. He'll debate, right? And try to come to the truth, and sometimes vanquish people in that way, but not in such a way that he has to crush everyone who crosses his way. And sometimes it does involve gairas, screaming at or criticizing harshly people that are truly evil, right? Sometimes that's required. And he gives his senses satisfaction, or feeds the senses, is the way Krupkin has it, right? The appropriate, that which is beneficial, that which is proper, that which is necessary. And he uses his hands and feet and his tongue for things that are necessary, and to accomplish his desires that are productive, that are moel, that are productive things. And all of his hearing, meaning, he doesn't mean the sense, well, it does mean the sense of hearing, but using hearing to learn, right? Varos, and the seeing of things, seeing things that inspire you, and seeing things to observe and learn from what you see, Vahargasha, and the feelings that one has, that which goes together with all of those things that we described, right? And then he uses all of his thought processes, his imagination, his memory, and then he thinks about his ability to make decisions, right? That uses all of the senses which we just described. All of these things help him, right, use his mind, right? But he doesn't leave out those things. All of those things that are physical feelings and physical senses and physical desires, he doesn't ignore them. He engages in them appropriately, though, right? Because if you would not use them, right, or if you would use only one and not the other, then they would become weak, and those faculties that he doesn't use would become weak, and he wouldn't be able to use them, and they have a lot of positive things to contribute. We're just about at an hour, so I'm kind of ending in the middle of a paragraph, but it's a very long paragraph, so we're going to have to start from the page 267. I'm going to make a little mark here so I don't forget where we ended. But I'm going to open the floor to comments. This idea that he's describing is a beautiful idea, and it's something unique and special that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi felt that Judaism had to offer that the other religions of the time weren't offering. A holiness that doesn't require being separate from society, that doesn't require not being involved in the usual physical activities, but on the contrary, you're supposed to be involved in these things and use them for proper purposes. And this is one of the basic foundations of Judaism, regardless of which school of thought you ascribe to. But I'm going to open the floor for questions or comments, just to complete tonight. So go ahead if anyone has anything interesting to say or contribute.
Well, I really like this section. I mean, this to me was the best section that we've had so far, because it was very informative, and it really, I think, hits a lot of really good points on how one should live one's life, which is what he's sort of alluding to.
Yeah.
And in summary, I think a lot of things relate to living in moderation. Living in moderation and pick your battles, I guess, is the deal. I mean, you don't want to necessarily be one that just goes and tries to win everything, but some things aren't important to win. You just go out and because you'll frustrate yourself and become very anxious and competitive, and your adrenaline will always be flowing. But many times it's important to let your adrenaline flow for certain things, and so you pick your battles, and the rest of the time you don't. I think those are really good ideas. I mean, in general, this is really good. And the thing about getting control of yourself before you try to do things with others is real important. Unfortunately, we don't see that happening a lot in modern society
nowadays. I know.
But it's something that maybe people ought to talk about more. You know
what? I was talking to my father this morning. because I'm teaching on my Let the Prophet Speak podcast. I'm teaching the Sefer Mishlei and Proverbs, and so much of the wisdom that we learn from Mishlei and the whole Torah in general, but that's just what I'm learning now. You see that the problems and issues that we see in front of us today, we have all this stuff that couldn't even have been imagined 20 years ago, let alone 100 or 1,000 years ago, right? It was the social media and this and that. And sometimes we think that these big problems are new, right? This is the problem of today. But when you see sometimes wisdom being said like this 1,000 years ago, he was saying this because it needed to be said then too, right? In other words, back then, those problems existed then. Some of these are basic human. Now they might be on steroids now, right? And they might be, multiplied by 1,000,000 megabytes or megapixels or gigapixels or whatever, right? And they might travel a lot faster than they used to. But the fundamental foibles of human behavior have been around for a long time, and they're
Haven't changed much.
and they're fundamentally the same.
Nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when you learn things like this, you're like, oh yeah, okay, so they were dealing with this then too. Oh, okay, so it's not so new, and it's obviously it's sad, that we have to deal with the same nonsense over and over again. We never quite learned our lessons. But on the other hand, it's a tiny bit of a silver lining to the cloud. When you realize, sometimes you look at the world today and you think, oh my God, it's terrible. It's never been this bad. All the, you know what? It's always had these issues. We're still here. We're moving forward. Far from perfect, but we can, we made it through all that stuff. Maybe we can make it through this too somehow.
Well, it tells you if you understand fundamental issues, and this is where Judaism is so good, in how to live your life, you can approach all of these problems as they come up, which are the same problems that everybody else has through eons has been dealing with. But you have a roadmap for it.
Yeah.
And you can sort of relax, even if you can't control things, you understand it and understand that this is not something new. Yeah, so I think it's good. That's why I think this section was really good.
No, I'll be honest. I felt the same thing. I wanted to rush through a lot of the things in the beginning because I wanted to get to here, and you were able to tell anyone that's been with me that's till now realizes that there's certain things that don't speak to me in the Kuzari, but I still want to learn it.
Most of this up to this point has not spoken to me. A few things, but not much.
Yeah, but it's still important for us to learn, to understand that way of thinking.
Yeah, but I think this speaks to me a little bit. So
I'm glad it does. We'll talk about this a little more later because we still have a way to go. But I have a couple of really interesting ideas for what to learn next. But I'll share them with you another occasion. I think that we've done our time for today. Everyone, thank you so much for joining. I just wish you a wonderful evening and thanks again.
So have a nice night.
Yes, bye-bye.